All right, so we're going to do something a little different today. A lot of people have talked to death about a lot of different aspects of Balatro, but what I want to talk about today is stakes. The way it works is you win a run on what is base difficulty, and then it says, "All right, cool." With that deck, it says, "All right, cool, but can you do it again?" Each deck individually, you have to go up the different stakes, and some of the some of the base games decks do actually require that you get to sort of higher stakes to unlock. So, but one of the things that I have found, however, and this is kind of what made me want to make this video, and it's been something that I've been putting off for a long time, is I found a mod, one of the mods for Balatro that I've played, that has, I found it handled this sort of stakes, the difficulty system, quote unquote, a little bit in what I would call a more interesting way. And not so I'm gonna do my very best not to say better, because that is if I say something is better, that is an objective statement. Now, aside from, we'll get to it, like blue stake, probably all agree that anything might, or that one's probably a what we could consider maybe an objective better in a mod if they change that, but we'll get to that. Aside from that, I want to go over really quick. We'll go over the base, sort of the base stakes and how they sort of affect the game a little bit, and then I'm gonna tell you later on which mod that it is that I found that I feel handles stakes in a more interesting way, and also the scaling challenge and whatnot. And then I'll leave it to you all in the comments, or I don't know if you want to response videos or whatever, to decide for yourself how you feel. White stake, pretty simple, base difficulty. You have to win a run on any deck to unlock certain things in the game. It's pretty standard. It's the one a lot of people play on. It's also the one generally, just for reference, in a lot of cases, it's also generally the stake that people will try and attempt to score Nan Inf on. Yeah, pretty standard. So, red stake, this is the next difficulty up. Small blinds giving no reward money is actually a bigger penalty. It's a bigger sort of change than you think, because it means that you need to be a lot more conscious about how you're spending your money, because that first round you will earn a lot less money. Even like round one, ante one, you'll have a lot less money. You'll have a lot less money going into that shop, and then subsequent small blinds, you will also have to be a little more conservative with your cash, just because a lot of blinds for, if you're going 8 antes, that's a third of the your potential games that you are earning less money. Green stake, this is the first time that the game does this. Spoilers, it does it again, where all that it's done is number has to go up faster. The real big difference here that you'll notice is, if your run wasn't that great before, it will struggle and die just that much faster. And then on the other hand, though, if your run is doing really well, you'll probably never notice this. So it does make a difference, don't get me wrong. You can see in the numbers that you need a higher number to get through green stake, but again, it really just kills bad runs faster. And then if you have, good runs slash, like, the amazing runs, just don't really ever notice it. Not bad, but number go up, that makes sense, right? Like, that's a fairly typical thing for scaling difficulty. So now, black stake, however, this one's really interesting, because this also changes nothing about how you score, but it changes your jokers, because now jokers that appear in the shop can be eternal, and which means, as you'd see, well, you might be thinking, oh, do I need to buy that Jimbo maybe for the tiny bit of extra malt that it gives me to help me, like, get through this next boss or what have you. But if it's Eternal Jimbo, that's a really hard sell. Now, most people wouldn't buy a Jimbo anyway, but being attached to now that Joker forever, it it makes things a little more difficult. Now, the other thing it does though, because they can't be destroyed, those Jokers do then allow for other sort of synergies because like Madness, for example, can't destroy Eternal Jokers, which means they get to stick around and you get to keep Madness and Madness scales. So that is actually there are some positives to Eternal, which is also why I find this one to be actually really interesting. This one, the Black Stake is, oh no, this is interesting, this is cool. And I think a lot of people agree with that Eternal is an interesting puzzle to solve, and that's where, like I said, like I like Black Stake. Like if I give a check mark for Black Stake. I'm just gonna say it. Blue Stake's rough. -1 discard. Oh, that's I think unless I'm mistaken, even like Local Thunk has said this one's the rough one, and this is the one at least as of the date of whenever this comes out and when I'm recording this, this is rough. Losing 1 discard makes a lot of decks much more inconsistent because all of a sudden you go from 3 to 2 discards. It also makes any of the Jokers that want you to, discard 1 card a lot potentially less valuable because you're using half your discards to only get rid of 1 card. It also is where I think a lot of the sort of higher stake metas of play pair or 2 pair or play hands that are much easier to assemble starts to come from. This one, I don't. This is like I said before. Blue Stake, I think, is the one that people could like probably point at and objectively potentially say that like, yeah, this one's pretty rough, and comparing it to something else is going to be pretty easy to say like, nah, let's take the other thing. So that one I don't think is a fair comparison if we're trying to like rate one stake versus another. Purple Stake, number go up faster again. Again, it makes sense. It's not overly it does not spark joy, right? Like it's not very inventive, but it is what it is. It makes sense that, as difficulties go up, number go up. Orange Stake, shops can now have perishable Jokers. Perishable Jokers are pretty much generally just not great. Having a Joker that's only going to last for 5 rounds, some of them you're fine with having that way because it just means that, if it's a Joker you weren't going to keep long term anyway, it can help, but I mean, it does kind of suck. The one thing to note, however, is your Joker cannot be perishable and eternal. So that is good. You can't have something stick around forever and be debuffed. We're not playing cryptid. Don't worry. The perishable Jokers aren't going to stay around forever. This is it's a perishable Joker isn't great, right? But this isn't a bad thing. It adds more. It makes it run more complicated by having your Jokers. Having your options in the shop potentially be like, okay, I maybe really want this, but I don't want it for only the next 5 rounds. And then also, because it's for the next 5 rounds, well, you might have to then skip some rounds because you're like, okay, I want to try and hit as many bosses as possible with this really cool, like, overpowered Joker I just found, right? And so that is something that it might be trying to incentivize you to skip more often because generally speaking, unless I'm mistaken, like from what I've heard of other like the sort of more experienced creators, I guess I would say like Brothel or Doc or even Murphy OVD, they generally like a lot of sort of high level Balatro players will kind of mention like you don't really want to skip unless it's like you absolutely have to, and this is one of those things where a really good perishable Joker might be where you start to skip a little bit more to try and like keep it as long as you can. And then last but not least, we have rentals. So Gold Stake, this is as high as regular Balatro goes, and it has rental jokers. They cost you $3 a round. That sucks. Like, that's if you play all 3 rounds in one ante, that's $9 a round. That's like that's a lot. It's a lot of money that you are paying to keep this Joker. So that is, it's. I'm not gonna tell you that it's like objectively never good to take a rental Joker, but it's not great to take a rental Joker, right? Like you have to be your run may end up being saved by the rental Joker in the short term, but in the long term, you're also losing the money, which might let you get further in that run or get that one extra reroll to find that thing in the shop that your run really needs, like that bear in mind whatever whatever you're actually looking for. So all in all, the stakes add some interesting things like eternal, rental, perishable. They increase the score, but like overall, like I said, it for me one of the things that's really lacking here is in a lot of cases nothing here really plays with skipping or the choices. It's a lot of these are more about the choices you have to make like in a specific like round, right? Like during the small blind, the choices you're making, because a lot of these are about like rental, your jokers not being able to do certain things or restricting your joker purchases, or for example like small blinds giving no rewards and things like that. So it's like like I said, so that's what I want to get across here as well, is like there's nothing wrong with these except for blue stake, you suck. But like I said, I found from playing a lot of mods that at least there is one mod in particular that has done a what I find to be a much more interesting job of dealing with the like scaling difficulty. That mod is Order Lab. Now, those of you who don't know what the Order Lab mod is, really quick additions. They add it's a basically a reimagining of Balatro in a sort of like slightly slash backwards maybe universe. And so they have Lateria cards instead of Arcana cards. They have Zodiac cards instead of planets. They have Mythos cards instead of spectral cards. Pretty much every Joker and Legendary has been reimagined. They have a bunch of different decks, their own vouchers and things like that. But also what they have as well is their own set of stakes. Now, what's important as well is from the beginning in Quartz Stake, I find their what they call their Quartz Stake, which is their base difficulty. For each of the small blind and the big blind, you can choose between 2 different blinds, one of which will always be lower and one will be higher. There are 4 different ones. There's Fold, there's the regular one, can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. There's All, which is slightly higher, and then there's All In, which is much higher. Now the difference is that Fold is a much lower blind. It's actually, you can see that it requires less chips, but it gives you a lower reward. And then there's the regular score gives you the regular sort of monetary reward and requires the regular score. Call is slightly higher, but it gives you slightly more money. All In usually only shows up on the big blind, but All In requires almost what the boss requires, and it has a big reward attached to it. This already for me allows for a lot more interesting decisions, because later on you're run killing it, all right, go all in, go for the hard, go for the high scores and get all that money. But if your runs, if you just need to make it like one more shop to get that, maybe that one thing that your run needs, that like one joker, that whatever, you might take that fold just to be able to, because it's a lower point score you need to get, and that might save your run. Already, like for me, that is more interesting than white stake, because in general you're making more decisions about how you want your score. Because the other thing is, if you take all the weak rewards, Well, you're earning less money, so you're having an easier time, but the game keeps scaling. Like that hasn't changed. The bosses are still scaling the same. So if you're earning less money, yeah, you might be having an easier time, but you might not be able to beat the bosses because they don't scale. Now, Topaz, their second one, blinds have less rewards. This one's rough, but it also does incentivize you to take the risk and try and take on those those harder versions of the blinds earlier on and later on to try and sort of compensate for those less rewards. I also like this more than red stake because in this instance, as you can see, blinds, the small blinds don't give no monetary reward even early on. And that's the thing. It's giving you some, taking a little bit away from everything, I feel like is better. And this is, sorry, I was trying to say, I was trying to not say better. I feel like this is a less punishing system than taking all the sort of monetary rewards from small blinds away. Now, amethyst stake, this is rougher than a lot of people if you don't really play into endless or you don't pay much attention to the score. +1 anti-win, that means you have to get to anti-9. That's not that's a lot further than anti-8 because the score all of a sudden required that's a lot higher. This, I think, is more interesting because now you have to plan for later in the game, right? You have more time before you get to the boss, but you also have to still get there. And you have to get there on lower rewards with potentially having to challenge yourself that little bit more. And like I said, this I find more interesting because this is also, okay, well, hold on. Now I have to get to 9. 8 doesn't do it anymore. But this right here, Sapphire Stake, this is where, for me, this was all of a sudden where stuff got interesting. You must skip at least 3 blinds after anti-1. Just a bit of an update here for what I'm going to say for Sapphire Stake. I want to make a slight correction to what I was saying about Sapphire Stake, or an update. I had, or at least what I thought would happen, was if you hadn't skipped, it would just like, your run would end. I have an example run we're going to go into here that will show what will happen. So let's get into it here. Everything up here, it's not really that important. You can see down here, I still have 3 skips required. If I was trying to win this, I would go, like, I take the bet here. I'm going to take the fold, and we're going to, like, just get through this to, so I can show you what exactly is happening. And now, here's the stressful part. Watch me biff this. Okay. Right here, you will see what happens. So, because you can see here, like when I get through the shop, I should say, ooh, Corpus, you're good. Okay, you see, okay. All right, so you can see here, skips required 3. I can't play this blind anymore. I'm in anti-8, so you can kind of extrapolate here. I have one big blind here, and then anti-9. I have the small blind and big blind that it is going to force me to skip. Now, the reason why this is important isn't actually in Sapphire Stake, although it is important here because it is showing you that, okay, if you don't skip by the time it's too late, it will force you to skip like the last 3 sort of blinds you can. So maybe, it does apply that you want to skip tactically because, your build potentially doesn't want to get into the situation I have artificially potentially created here, which is that I am now forced to skip. I have to skip this blind. It won't, it doesn't matter which I pick. Like, I can't even swap here, or I can swap here, but it's still going to say, like, you have to skip this blind, and I will have to skip the next ones. Where this is more important, however, is when it comes to Obsidian Stake. You'll see in the graphic, you can't skip in anti-9 of Obsidian Stake. because they're all bosses, it won't allow you to skip. That also means you can't, this situation where you have to skip, you have to get all your skipping done before the end of Ante 8. So you could, if you're just not skipping, end up in a position where you skip, you skip blind 1, you skip sort of the big blind, pardon me, of Ante 8, and you skipped, say, the big blind of Ante 7 because you just didn't find good opportunities to skip. That is very possible when it comes to what I will talk about later, which is Obsidian Stake. But, so, just wanted to make that little correction here for this, for the video. Anyways, we will get back to me from before when I was recording most of this video. This, for me, is really interesting because one of the things that none of these stakes do, they don't make you interact with skipping at all. Because, and like and remember, just a little while ago, I mentioned that in general, you don't want to skip because it's not valuable. You lose a lot of things by skipping, and yeah, you get whatever tag it is, but generally it's almost always negative to skip. Well, now you have to. Well, what do? You have, all of a sudden, you are now like considering, okay, well, can I skip here? How many skips do I have? How many times have I skipped? Do I have to, skip this one? Because I've just been finding horrible rewards and I haven't been able to afford to skip because I haven't scaled well enough. This, for me, is where the stakes for Order Lab, like going through these, this is where I was like, okay, hey, hold on. And that's where I sort of thought about making this video, comparing these two. Now, I can't really compare Blue and Emerald because that's, like I said, almost anything is better, quote unquote, than losing a discard. But active Zodiacs lose 1 level after defeating a blind, and required score scales faster for each ante. Now, that's a big change, but we'll take them one at a time. Required score scales faster. We've seen that number go up, number required go up faster. It's a fine change, right? It makes sense at some point that they would say, hey, number go up more. The biggest difference here, however, is, remember, from Amethyst Stake, we need to get to 9. Well, that number is also much higher than the number for 8 was before, so that's where that's interesting. The other thing that this interacts with is, just really quick, the way Zodiacs work is they give you a buff, a temporary level buff to a specific hand the next time you play it, and then that level that they give, the number of levels they give, goes down every time they give that. Well, you can hold on to those and build up a bunch of them normally, but this says all of those active Zodiacs that you're not using, so you have a bunch of them, say like 2 pair and all that, well, if you're not playing those hands and you win anyway, well, now that level goes down until they just disappear. So those buffs, if you were trying to hold on to one or what have you, you can't do that as easily after Emerald Stake. It is a good, this I feel is a good like difficulty change for Order Lab. I like the fact that it also says required score scales faster, because there are going to be some decks that don't care much about Zodiac levels. But the other thing I will say though, and I'll mention it here, is it's not always as easy to get planet levels in, like permanent hand levels in Order Lab, because generally in Order Lab you don't find planet packs, so, which is another huge difference. So a lot of your hands might be pretty low level, so that's where Zodiacs come in, and that's where this also becomes a bit difficult, because it's hard to sort of hold on to a bunch of buffs for, say, like 4 of a kind or something like that. Moving on, Jokers in the shop can be cursed. Curses are pretty rough. This one, it's, I don't hate it, but I like actively like, this is pretty bad. Some of the curses can be pretty bad. So this is one where this is still an interesting change, but it is purely just a negative, because like the curses are stuff like, while you hold this, the every hand you play loses 2 hand levels. That's pretty rough. One of them is that you can't move it, and it just picks whatever position it wants to be in all the time. That's also pretty rough. If you need this, this is one of those things, you want it at the end or want it at the start or whatever. No, I'm just gonna go, I'm gonna stay in position 2 for now or whatever. And so it's not this one, it's something you can potentially work around, but it does also mean that sometimes you're just gonna find a joker where you're like, ooh, I'd really like that, but this joker has pestilence, and that means that like a third of the time it's just gonna go, nah, I don't want to work today. And are you gonna try and work through that unreliability? Because that's pretty rough if like a third of the time you have a joker slot that just says, nah, I'm good. Diamond Stake. Ante 5 has a finisher blind. So this means that the boss for Ante 5 has one of the like final boss blinds in it. That's rough because, as you might be aware, a lot of those require a lot of score. They can have a pretty brutal effect. Like, say you have to sell one of your jokers to even have any of your cards work, or we're gonna turn off one of your jokers, or there's a bunch of them that were added by Order Lab. But this is a pretty rough go. This makes a run much more difficult because, also remember, way back here, you have to be skipping as well. So you've also potentially now got to worry about, well, you have a boss coming up on Ante 5 and one coming up later on Ante 9, but somewhere between there, after Ante 1, you have to skip a bunch of blinds. This is rough. This one's difficult. Ante 9 has 3 final bosses. Now, the other thing you can see is, in this instance, the first 2, what would be your small blind and your big blind, you do get to choose between 2 different bosses. The third one, what is your run's final boss, is always set. This is hard. This means you're gonna have fought total of 4 of the like finisher blinds by the end of this run, and you might run into instances where actively, like, you're looking at all these bosses going, my deck doesn't beat, like, cannot get through, say, like, this, and this, or you might go, okay, I have to use this, I have to try this one, and then, like, I still gonna struggle on, like, the actual boss. Obsidian Stake, it is no joke. It is challenging. Now, that is not to say that like Gold Stake isn't difficult. I find these difficulty modifiers to be much more engaging because, like I said, even from Quartz Stake, you're making more decisions about how your run goes. You're having to decide, okay, am I taking on a smaller challenge but getting a much smaller reward, but having an easier time? But is that going to punish me later because I'm not going to have as much money later, right? And things like, okay, well, my run has to go to Ante 9, and especially if you're all the way over here, I'm also going to be fighting a bunch of bosses, right? So I have to potentially be prepared for all these different bosses coming up and going, okay, well, can my build, are there some of these bosses that my build can't play through? You got to plan for, like, okay, can I potentially optimize that, or can I try and like mitigate if I run into the boss that says can't sell Joker, that you have to sell a Joker, or things like that. Also, not to say Obsidian Stake is a little harder, but like if you objectively look at the numbers, the bosses for Obsidian Stake will be harder than, or like require more score than the bosses in Gold will, because the boss is literally like round 9 instead of round 8, right? So the numbers just line up, that one is higher than the other. But anyways, but you know what? I think we're going to leave it there. And you know what? I want to know what you think. Please, if you've gotten this far in the video, let me know in the comments down below. And I want to say, like, this will probably require a lot of editing on my part, so let me know if you like these types of videos, or you even care about that I made this video. If you liked it, please do give me a like, and please consider subscribing. It does help out a great deal. But anyways, yeah, so yeah, let me know what you think, and Regardless, you all have yourself a good day, evening, wherever you are, and thank you so much for watching.